Hey y'all, Chief Red here back with another video, and today we're talking recruiting. We're going to discuss exactly how to dominate recruiting in your dynasties on College Football 26. I didn't want to make the video too long, so I ultimately decided to break it up into a couple parts. Part one, which you're listening to right now, is going to discuss the basics, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into my personal strategy and philosophy for part two. So if you already got the basics down and you don't need any refreshers there, go ahead and skip ahead to part two, which I will have linked at the end of the video. And if you haven't already, please hit a like on the video and go ahead and hit that subscribe while you're at it so you can follow along with the journey to me building this channel. Appreciate the support, and let's get into it. So I want to start with the first three tabs that we're going to talk about, which is the transfer portal tab, the my school, and the top classes, because these are going to be the quickest to talk about. There's really not much to these, and then we'll go into a little more detail on the last two. So when you go into the recruiting screen, you're going to see the transfer portal tab, which is not relevant to the regular season. This is only available during the off season, and it's during the transfer portal window, which is a 4-week window, and it's going to resemble the prospect list pretty much exactly. All right. And we'll talk about the prospect list in a bit, but you don't need to worry about the transfer portal right now. Like I said, I might make a separate video on the transfer portal, so let's not worry about that. The top classes tab is really just a hub to let you know kind of where you stand compared to other schools. So, it's going to show you your total number of recruits, how many 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, and so on, and then how many points you have for getting those recruits. It's going to give you a little summary on the right-hand side of all the different recruits that you have acquired, and you've got a breakdown using, if you hold down R2, you can see it for overall. You can see your standing for just your regular season recruits that you got, and you can also see your standing for just transfers. And if you hold down L2, you can have that breakdown by conference or, nationally. So that's the top classes tab. All right. So on the My School tab, this one is going to show you your My School grades for different motivations. Motivations are basically just categories that are going to affect a recruit's ideal pitch. Okay. Recruits all have an ideal pitch, and they consist of 3 of the different categories that pertain to, different things like proximity to home, or you might see something like someone who might be interested in being part of a championship contender, or you may see, campus lifestyle as one, playing style, playing time. Like all of these are different motivations, and it's going to be different for every recruit. But basically, a combination of any 3 of these is going to make up their motivation. And you're going to have a grade that pertains to all of these different categories. So the My School tab is just going to give you a breakdown of some of those. And, that's pretty much it. You can go on there and you can see basically who would be at risk to transfer. You can see how to improve that grade. Now, the tricky part is that some of these you cannot change at all. So, for example, proximity to home, your school is located where it's located. You can't change that, right? But it is going to be affected based on which recruit you go after. If you're at Texas, a recruit at Texas is going to be closer, and you're going to have a better grade for proximity to home for that particular recruit, as opposed to if you're getting someone else who's in North Carolina, their grade's not going to be as good, right, for proximity to home. Now, if you were to go look at something like championship contender, that has absolutely nothing to do with the recruit specifically, but everything to do with how much you're winning. Are you getting to the college football playoff? Are you winning championships? Are you even close to winning a championship? If you're not, and you're going, 5 and 7 every year, well, then guess what? Your grade's going to be kind of bad, right? So that's where the breakdown difference comes in. And honestly, this is just something that you have to kind of go through that My School tab and take a look at, because your grade's going to be different depending on what school you're at, and it's going to be different depending on how much you're winning, and different factors, right? So there's a lot of different factors that make up a lot of these different categories, and this is something that you can all see on the My School tab. You can also take a look at other schools' My School grades. So if you are in a recruiting battle and you want to know how they're beating you out, or if they have a chance at catching you or anything like that, then you can also look on this tab and hold L2, and you can see each school and their grades, right? So ultimately, for these first three tabs that we just discussed, like I said, these are very straightforward. There's not much to do with these tabs. You're not going to be spending a whole lot of time on these tabs, but it is kind of like a reference point so you can have it to help you in your recruiting journey. All right, now moving on to the prospect list. This is going to be your main hub for basically the entire database of who's available in this recruiting class. This is going to tell you all the details you need to know about each recruit in terms of just kind of the preliminary details. It'll tell you obviously their position, but it'll tell you their archetype. It'll tell you basically what their star rating is. So 1 star versus a 5 star. It's going to tell you what their ranking is, but not just their overall ranking. It's going to tell you by position, state, and within the nation. So it'll tell you exactly who it is you're trying to target, and you can look here and see what their interest is in you. So if you are in the top 10 already, just starting out, it'll tell you that. And if you don't see anything there, that means that they don't have you on their radar, basically. It'll also tell you what stage they're at. So if they are in, for example, their top 8 stage, that means that they've narrowed down their list of schools to their top 8. And there's a few more stages. There's a top 5, a top 3, and then the last stage is obviously when they make their decision. You can also see their location. So you'll see what their hometown is. And next to this, you're going to see, a little symbol for basically pipeline. So every coach, when you make your coach, you might have picked a pipeline, and you're going to see basically how close that player is to your pipeline. So like for my coach at Texas Tech, I made his pipeline North Texas, which means that anything anywhere near North Texas is going to be a lot closer. And you've got a ranking for pipeline, which is going to be 1 through 5. And if you're a 1 and you're bronze, that means that you are pretty far away. And obviously, if you see nothing, that means you're not even close, right? But if you see something like, it has tiers. So 1 would be bronze, 2 is silver, 3 is gold, 4 is like a platinum, and then 5 is the purple, which is kind of like probably like a Hall of Fame type of tier, if you want to think of it that way. So all your coaches are going to have a pipeline. Obviously, when you make your coach, you pick one, but your offensive and defensive coordinators are going to have a pipeline as well. So it is important that if you ever have to hire additional coaches, you might want to think about that and try and get coaches that have a pipeline that's a little bit different than you. Obviously, I wouldn't pass up on a good coach just because he has a different pipeline, but it's just something to think about. So the other thing with this tab is you have a search function. So if you hit triangle, you can basically search for whatever position you want. You can narrow it down by archetype. You can narrow it down by things like star rating. And it just ultimately, is just a useful tool in case you're looking for a very specific thing. So the last piece of this is you're going to notice in the first column, there's going to be all these different icons. And it's the TAR column, which just stands for target, right? So you could potentially see nothing there, or you could see it filled out with some random icon. Well, if there's nothing there, that just means that they're not interested in you. And it doesn't mean that you can't target them. It just means that you're not in their top 10, basically. And it's not recommended that you would go after them, but that's never stopped anybody before, right? So if you're in their top 10, then it's going to recommend that you go after them, and the prospect will be lit up green. Okay. If you add a prospect to your recruiting board, then you'll see a crosshair. And the crosshair just means that you're targeting them, right? You might see other icons in here later in the process once a person has committed. I think you might see the school logo or something like that. Or if you've been locked out for a deal breaker, then you'll also see the deal breaker icon in that column as well. So overall, prospect list is just something that's going to give you a summary of basically, who you're targeting or who you have the ability to target based on who's available. So now it's time to talk about the recruiting board. The recruiting board is really important. This is going to be where you spend a majority of your time. And this is going to give you all the details of whoever it is you decide to target. There's a lot to get through here, so I'm going to try and make it as quick and clean as possible. So starting with the scouting tab, you're going to notice that it says that it costs 10 hours to scout. So keep in mind, this is not 10 hours to scout all of the attributes. You're going to have to do this multiple times in order to uncover all of the attributes. And this is going to vary by position. So one thing to note here is that you can actually lower the amount that it takes to scout by going under the recruiter tab in the coaching tree. And this is something that I would highly recommend just because it actually helps out, in my opinion, even if you didn't start with a recruiter, coaching base. So once you unlock all of the attributes that are relevant, right, they're only going to give you so many. I believe they give you 10, right? But it's relevant to their position. You're going to see their attributes, you're going to see their abilities, and then also their mentals. And you're not going to necessarily be able to see their development trait, but there is a perk under the strategist coaching tree that allows you to see their development trait early. So just something to note there. So that's pretty much all there is with the scouting tab, but this is important if you want to get an idea of who would even be worth your time to recruit. Okay. Now, when you scout, you could potentially uncover a green gem or a gem that'll have a red X through it. The gem with the red X is basically the game's way of signifying whether or not this player might be a bust. And then you also have the green gem, which is kind of like your diamond in the rough type players. The key here is that understanding that the bust doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a bad player. It just might mean that there might be a chance that they don't live up to their potential, right? So, for example, a 5-star bust is not a bad player, but it's really going to be up to you whether or not you want to really target this player or not. So, something to think about. Also on the recruiting board tab is going to be an overview tab. So on the overview, this basically gives you a summary of everything that you need to know about a specific player. So obviously at the top, you're going to have the basic info that you would have seen on the prospect list, which is their name, their position, archetype, and their rankings, right? But on the overview tab in the middle, you're going to see all the different schools that make up their top, basically their top 10, but you're not going to see the 10th school. You'll see the top 9 because the first stage is going to be top 8. And then you're obviously going to see who's at number 9, which is basically the French school. So you'll see that. And then you're going to see as they continue to go through the process, it'll get narrowed down to their top 5 and then their top 3. And eventually they'll commit to a school. So ultimately here on this tab, this is going to give you all of the information you need to know about this player. You're going to see what their deal breaker is, what grade you need, and whether or not, you meet that deal breaker criteria. And then you're going to also see the action summary. And basically those are going to be your main pieces of information that you're going to need to be able to start recruiting. So the deal breaker is basically one of those motivations that we talked about earlier, where a player might really want this certain criteria, and it's always going to be one of the motivations, but basically they'll have a certain motivation that's more important to them than anything else, basically. And if you don't meet that grade criteria, they would have a chance of either you not being able to recruit them, they might knock you out of the recruiting race, or if you have them on the team and you fall in terms of grade with that deal breaker, then they might transfer. Okay. So keep an eye on your deal breakers. Now, when it comes to the action summary, this is just something that basically tells you the history of what you've done to target this particular recruit. You're going to have a list of actions that allow you to recruit, and the action summary is going to give you a history of what's happened over the course of time. The other thing you're going to see is the influence bars. So each school is going to have their own influence bar, which is really just going to show you how much influence you've gained with that recruit. And it's going to show you also how far along they are in their process. So really and truly, the top bar at the top is going to mirror the influence status of the first school. Okay. So it's going to be exactly the same. So because they're only as far as their first school, right? So if the first school has them pretty far along, then that's how far they are. It doesn't matter where the rest of them are because they're behind the first school. Okay. So that's pretty much it. Don't get confused by the two-tone nature of the influence bars, because all that's showing you is how much influence was gained in the last week, right? So if you go from week 1 to week 2, for example, you're going to see basically a solid color, and then you're going to see kind of like a grayed out color. The grayed out color just shows you how much influence was gained within that time period. So really and truly, they are as far as the end of the bar. It's just that it's showing you, okay, with this secondary color, this is how much influence you gained within the last week. So that's pretty much it with the overview tab. So for the last piece, we're going to talk the recruiting tab right in the middle. So if you look at the recruiting tab, basically this is going to be your main spot for actually targeting recruits. When you go in here, you're going to notice a few important pieces of information. Number one, if you look in the top right, you're going to see the total amount of hours that you have to allocate across the board. Okay, remember, you have up to 35 recruits on your board at any given time. And also keep in mind that these 35 recruits are for the entire season and the off season. So if you were to fill out all 35 spots, you will have no space for transfers. So keep that in mind. You can also offer up to 35 scholarships. Now, you don't have to offer 35 scholarships, but you can do up to 35 scholarships. So something like a kicker or a punter, you might not want to give them a scholarship, right? But it really just depends. You can do what you want to do. I'm just pointing that out. Now, when it comes to the amount of hours in the middle, you might notice on my screen, it says 900. Well, when I started at Texas Tech, I had 700. I got more hours by basically winning. And over time, you'll see those hours go up. And it's also important to note that you get less hours during the season than you would in the off season. So you actually have more hours in the transfer portal and just in regular off season recruiting to start, because theoretically you would have less hours during the season to recruit. So they're basically trying to say, we're going to give you less hours because you have games going on, right? So ultimately, you're going to have your total number of hours, which is going to be allocated across the board. Your 900 hours or however many hours it is going to be something that you're going to have to manage across all 35 recruits or however many recruits you have. But when you go into your recruiting tab, you're going to notice on the right that you have a list of motivations that we talked about earlier. These motivations are going to need to be uncovered so that you can determine what's called the ideal pitch, which is really just a combination of 3 of these motivations that's going to be unique to every single recruit. Obviously, some recruits might have the same set of motivations, but that's not the point. So the entire point of this is to uncover their ideal pitch so that you can gain as much influence as possible. The more influence you have into a recruit, the more quickly you can get them to arrive at a commit decision. And ultimately, that's the entire point of this, right? You go into the general actions. The general actions are going to allow you to gain as much influence as possible. So it's really important to understand how to balance these hours so that you can basically target as many people as you can within reason, right? It's very rare that I actually fill up my board with 35 players at one time because you may not have the allocation. And I'm at a school that when we started, we were 3.5 stars. I had 700 hours to spend across all of my recruits. So it just wasn't really feasible to basically target 35 people at one time. It's just not that realistic. And if you're at a school that's got 500 hours or maybe even less, then it's really not going to be realistic, right? So you have to be really good at balancing. And of course, this is something we'll talk about a little bit later in the strategy video, but ultimately that's the entire point. All of this is going to come down to scouting and how you manage your hours. That's the entire extent of it. And we'll get into the rest on the next video. So let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if this video helped you. I hope it did. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. I will try my best to respond to everybody. But I appreciate all of your support. Appreciate the likes. Appreciate the subscribes. And yeah, as usual, appreciate you sticking around. Y'all take it easy.